Okay, so I made a post on the Instagrams to get a bunch of questions from you guys to kind of go over some individual questions and thoughts you had about these bikes and if they're going to be for you. So we're just going to run through some of them. Don't take these answers as set in stone. This is my personal opinion on your questions. So yeah, let's start out first with the main post. First question we have, is it possible to pedal the bike without the battery? Yes, it is, but why would you want to? I mean, the 600 is plenty light enough, and yeah, if you really were in a zone where you can't have a battery on your bike, yeah, you can pull the battery and you can still pedal it. All right, second question, can you overstroke it to make it 150 rear and set up with a 160 mil fork? I'm guessing that's in question to the Druid Lite, as the Druid Core comes in that setup. You can actually run a 170 mil Zeb. They have tested it up to 170 mil with the proper axle to ground, and that will make the bike a bit slacker. Sure, you could probably run a 180, slacken it out a bit more, bottom bracket raises, but yep, they have tested it to 170. Does it manual from Lolo Racks? I mean, I am not the best manualer, but I did a pretty sweet wheelie down a hill. So yeah, it can manual. It is long out back, so that initial pull up to get the bike up is a bit challenging, but it has a pretty minimal rearward axle growth. I think they said it was like 6 or 7 millimeters, so you're not getting a ton of change when you're pressing into the bike in those manuals. Availability in the USA, we are looking late July, August timeframe for these to be landing in your local bike shops. We got a pretty in-depth question here from Andy DeVault. Really excited to learn more about this bike. I'm a bigger guy, 6 foot, 220, kitted up, currently ride a Crestline with a Gen 4 race motor. Loved it, but love to hear your thoughts on the Core versus the Crestline, also versus the new Levo. Size recommendation for a 6 foot rider, and is 150 mil enough in the back for gnarlier terrain? Okay, Core versus Crestline. Crestline, that was my favorite bike from the shootout, which hopefully that video's out now. I'm not giving away any secrets. They are very different. The Crestline feels much shorter out back and is easier to flick around and change directions on flatter terrain. Once the trails get steeper, pretty similar, like kind of similar story with all bikes. You can definitely tell through some of the really higher speed rough stuff that 180 mil on the Crestline does shine through over the 150 on the Core model. But with that said, the 150 is a big jump up from the 140 on the Lite, and that all has to do with the Vivid shock out back. It's enough. It for sure is enough. Maybe if you're constantly riding huge, big hit terrain, you might want to opt for more travel, but generally speaking, I don't think the 150 is going to hold you back. We rode DCDH yesterday, which is pretty heavy hitting fast trail, and I definitely wasn't wishing I had more travel. I was wishing maybe for some more setup time. You know, we have limited time on these bikes. So I'd say setup is more important than that final travel number. As a 6 foot guy, definitely S3. I'm 6'1" with long arms, long legs, and the cockpit feel, on bike feel was dialed for me. Yeah, their amalgamation of geo is really interesting. They're measuring from center of your steer to your bottom bracket, and that's kind of where they look at height, and the proportions grow with each size. I believe it was 17 mil rear end growth between each size. So they're really catering each bike size to a given rider. If you're someone that likes smaller bikes, size down, vice versa. Kind of same story there. Best bang for your buck build spec. Get the spec with the best suspension you can afford. Hands down, that is my one go-to. Let's see, another gentleman chiming in, looking at some broken English here, but looks like he's between a size S2 and an S3. Ollie had a good point, that when you are looking at bike sizing, if you are in between, it's a lot easier to make a smaller bike feel bigger, whether that's with lowering your bar height, longer stem, slamming the seat back a little bit on the rails. Overall, generally speaking, sizing down on these bikes isn't going to feel as weird as sizing down on others because of that proportional chainstay length. your weight's still gonna be pretty centered on the bike. And if you are finding not enough front end grip, going to a 45 or 50 mil stem will solve that pretty quickly. And sorry, at 5'10", I don't think the large would be too big. The rear end length will feel a bit unwieldy if you're not a really active rider on the bike. But if you are an active rider, changing your body weight on the bike quite a bit, I think you'll be fine. If I were spending my money at your height, I would probably go to an S2 and just get the cockpit reach dialed and how it feels for climbing. I did not feel too cramped on the size 3, and I actually really, really enjoyed that shorter reach. Next question, your take on short reach, high stack would be appreciated. As someone that has a really high saddle height, I struggle with a lot of hand pain on climbs with shorter stacks, and then compensating with taller bars, and then I'm losing front end grip. So for me, their algorithm of what they're doing with geometry works well. I think it takes more time to get used to a bike like that than a more traditional geo set. And I think especially with the longer rear end where your weight is, it's like very centered on the bike. So you have a lot of room to go forward and back with your body position on the trail. And it's different. Like, it is different, and they make no claims that is the best end all be all for everybody. It is very specific to what these guys want out of their bike. So if you have a demo or able to get on one, take it for a quick loop, you'll know pretty quick if it's something you can, change your riding habits to. And for me, I generally like to ride off the back, but with the shorter rear ends, I have to stay more centered. So I was finding myself being able to go further and further off the back and really play with the bike in that regards. Range comparisons, Amflow, Uno, and the Core. Second half of this guy's question, Nick Reese wants to know the additional costs and if it will require 2 chains and how long they're expected to last. On that note, range, highly, highly dependent on rider weight, tire spec, trail conditions. They're gonna be all about the same. Bikes are pretty similar in weight, so it's hard to say at this point. I'm sure there's some variances between, motors and production dates and all that kind of fun stuff. But yeah, at 170 pounds, my riding experience is gonna be a lot different than Robert's riding experience at 220 pounds. So don't want to set anything in stone there, but if you keep it in auto, we did yesterday around 3,400 feet, and I had 28% battery left. Dry trail conditions, 170-pound rider. So yeah, and I did go into turbo a fair amount on some steeper road climbs, which was super fun. This takes a standard SRAM T-type chain, no extra chains needed, so same cost. You're actually using more of the chain, so you're wasting less. And then when it comes to the wear on the system, that upper idler wheel keeps the chain more in line with the cassette, so you're getting less wandering with the chain on the drive chainring where all the power is happening at the chainring where the motor is. There's no power coming through on that idler. So in theory, you are going to have less chain wear. The guys here have about, I think he said it was 1,300 kilometers on a chain before it was needing to be replaced, which, I think that's very valid and plenty enough time for a very high stress component to last. Robert Johnson of the Loam Wolf asks, did Cole get a point on the bike? Yesterday I texted him, I said, went great, first ride, no points, and then last corner of the last trail I got a flat, so I did get a point. And if you're unfamiliar with what points are, check out the EMTB shootouts and you will learn more about what that is there. Is the DJI motor rattling, and how different is high stack riding coming from a 2018 27.5 Patrol smiley laughy face? The motor does not rattle nearly as much as a Gen 4 Bosch, but it is a hair more rattly and loud in certain instances than the Gen 5 Bosch motors, but the motor noise itself climbing on this bike is really subdued. The package they've put this motor in kind of deadens the sound a bit. From my experience, it's on par with the Bosch system. Nothing really stands out there. kind of touched on high stack riding earlier. I do not know the numbers of a 2018 27.5 Patrol, but it is going to feel very different and something to keep your mind open to if you do try one of these. It is a very different geo set and a very different ethos in how Forbidden builds their bikes than how Transition built them in 2018. What does it feel like? What does it really feel like to have a difference between 150 and 140, and how much do they punch above? There is a big difference, and I was surprised at that. The 140, really agile, gain speed pumping, and I think more of that comes down to the shock rather than the travel numbers. We have the Super Deluxe with the larger Megneg style can on here. I think it's the Linear Plus. It's the biggest can you can get for the Super Deluxe. Whereas that Vivid already has a big can, has more oil volume, has more oil moving through the shim stack, so it's going to be a bit slower and a more damped feel. That for sure was the bigger thing I noticed on these bikes outside of the travel figures. If you're looking for something to be really efficient and generate speed with your body weight, pumping, pressing out of corners, the Lite's gonna be the move. If you wanna gobble bigger hits, the 150 is great. As far as riding above its weight class, yeah, I would say so. I think the 130 feels like it's a 150 non-high pivot bike, and the 140 feels like a 160, and the 150 feels between a 170 and maybe 180 in certain cases. But with what they're doing with the shock tunes and compensating for the travel and their high pivot witchcraft, it is a really interesting and different feel. How does it compare to the Norco Sight VLT? Great question. That is actually a really good comparison to this bike. Different drive units, similar ideation of high pivot in that 150 mil range, 140 mil range. The Norco Sight is more playful. Hands down, it is snappier around corners, almost to the point of losing traction is something I was struggling with that bike at our shootout. Longer rear end on this. Loads more traction climbing and loads more descending. A little bit harder to predict on flat corners with the longer rear end on this bike, specifically the Druid Lite over that Sight VLT. This feels like it has more travel. One of the things I noticed on the Sight, and Drew also mentioned this, is we were getting kind of a weird spike near bottom out at the end of the stroke that was kind of harsh. And I did not have any harshness at all. Like, it was zero harshness whatsoever on this platform. And yeah, I think the biggest thing overall is, if you're looking at these two bikes, do you want to jump and play and jib more than you want kind of more plush traction, speed focused, with still the ability to play, albeit with more body English? Some differentiations there. How responsive and controllable is the power compared to the new Levo and updated Bosch motor? There's a couple questions in here regarding that. Originally riding these motors untuned, not the biggest fan on tech climbs. Once you get into the system and start down tuning where the power hits and making it your own, it becomes much more like the Bosch system. I feel it is not as refined, that those kind of half crank pedal pressure scenarios. I am more in tune with the Bosch system. I've also spent a lot more time on the Bosch system, so there's something to be said about that there as well. Outside of that, both systems can be tuned to come on hard, come on soft, and yeah, just very different in how they deliver power with their algorithms compared to the S-Works motor. The initial hit of the DJI motor is more powerful in full crazy mode. With that said, I rarely ride it in full crazy mode unless we are on a gravel road climb, in which case it is awesome, super fun. But the Specialized had some lag when you're in auto and getting on the power, whereas the auto mode in this seems to be a more linear on-off of the power, whereas the S-Works auto mode had a harder ramp up. More short reach stack questions in here as well. Refer back. Reach looks short. Don't look at it on paper. watch more videos on how they, and even this video and earlier talking about their design ethos and why they're building bikes like this and their whole algorithm behind their geometry. It is not just about reach. I definitely get sacked into that as well and looking at, oh, 467, it's gonna be too small. The only thing it is more comfortable on the climbs. Definitely didn't have any downsides on the descent. Bike rips, or bike looks like it rips. What about the DJI support in the US warranty parts availability? Through their authorized network, you have full support just like all the other brands. Does it beat current bikes in the market? It's different. I think earlier talking about the Site VLT and what that bike is designed to do and how they ride is probably the best comparison, short travel, high pivot. Yeah, it's its own thing. I like it. I really want more time on it in different terrain, but it was super fun on those kind of blue tech flow trails. I didn't have a problem doing cutties and turning about. Did take me longer and still not completely comfortable with how it corners because of that longer rear end, but that only comes with time. It's just a very different bike, and if you are looking for something with that longer wheelbase, with more ability to really use your body weight on the bike and not be so narrowly focused on the shorter rear end and where your body has to be, it is a bike to keep in consideration. If you can get on one, even if it's not an e-bike, get on one of their other analog bikes. It will give you an idea of their philosophy. Is there anything better? Very subjective. Like, yeah, that's a hard one. That's probably the hardest question, right? What's your terrain? What's your riding style? What's your skill level? This all goes into what makes the best bike for you. Best bike for me is not going to be the best bike for my partner Emma. Like she looks for something different. So it's really depends on what you're after. How do they jump? Fine, like great. No complaints there. We didn't hit like big jumps, but especially on the Lite, was pulling for roller doubles, blind on the trails that we were riding here in Cumberland. No complaints there. I would say probably going to be harder to get sideways with the longer rear end coming off lips, but time will tell. Another better than all the bikes you guys tested during the shootout. It would be a front runner in my editor's pick for sure, especially the Lite. This over the Trek Rail. Yeah, it's tough. I did prefer it more than the Levo, and that feel I was getting out of the rear end. Little less harsh, even with that Genie shock. Yeah, it's tough. Yeah, that's a tough one. But when it comes to choosing a bike, what I'm choosing is going to be different than yours. Yeah, I mean, I would not be mad whatsoever to have this bike forever, and then not do anything to it. Like, it's pretty sweet. And why they went with short travel and the shock. So short travel, it is a Druid e-bike. It is the philosophy that they have developed with their analog Druid over the years and the two versions that they've had of that bike. They have put that algorithm and just mesh of numbers and ride characteristics into this bike and have given you two different options from the get-go because they found people upbuilding their Druids, putting Zebs on them, putting bigger shocks. So they have given riders the option to do that. And I think that's pretty smart from a brand, kind of seeing what the market is doing with their bikes and adapting. You know, from their perspective, like it's not a big ask when you're developing a frame like this to do these two different build kits. And yeah, it'd be interesting in the future if we see a longer travel e-bike. I would imagine, like I have zero information on that, but looking at this bike, at what it was built around, it's kind of setting the stage for a longer travel e-bike. So time will tell. That would be sweet. It'd be really interesting. But yeah, they built this bike to be a pedal assist version of the Amish Druid bike. Well, everyone, that takes care of it. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video and learn more about the Druid line of e-bikes. If you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the comments below. I'll be sure to answer in the best way I can. If not, I will refer to Forbidden for anything I do not know. And yeah, that's about it. Until next time, we'll catch you on the trails.